I was looking at for a lecture today. And it's kind of interesting because I work with guides from the other side, and oftentimes they teach me things along the way. And part of it has to do with light. There are 34 chapters in the Bible that refer to light. I think the way that they're teaching me this right now is that people have not got it right as far as what light actually is. And the reason is because I'm sorry. No, stop it. They're playing with me. That ultimately, on the first day, Genesis 1:1, that God created light and separated it from the darkness. But it's also that God doesn't create the stars, the sun, and the moon until the sixth day. It's kind of really an interesting thing, is it refers to light in Genesis 1:1, and yet it wasn't about the light of the sun or the reflection of the moon. But what is light? This table is dense. You live in a world where you accept things as being because we put our hands here, but I was told that I could take this to a liquid and bring it back to a solid anytime I want. But that I would have to understand the laws of nature that allow me to do that. So what are the laws pertaining to thought and intent? That we accept things because we believe them to be. And that belief system follows through and carries us into our opinions. And yet, what really is light? This is dense, this is heavy. The air around you, most of you can't see, but you feel it, you know it's there. In ancient Egyptian times, they referred to your heart would be weighed against a feather. And we know that a feather is what? Light. So what is it actually talking about? What is the experience between the denseness and the light? One of the things that I want to read to you, because I pulled this up specifically, there's a man named Wilcox, and he is going into our DNA as not a biological blueprint, but a receiver tuning into the cosmic itself. The idea that DNA is simply a biological instruction manual and a fixed code builds bodies and nothing more is one that David has spent years challenging, drawing from the work of Russian physicist Peter something and the field known as wave genetics. Wilcox argues that DNA behaves like a static blueprint, and less like a static blueprint and more like an antenna. I want you to think for a minute the fact that every atom has intelligence. Let's look at the fact that every single cell in your being actually has its own intelligence. And science now can register it as an individual. Imagine that every single cell in your body has intelligence. So what is the difference that carries here? Because outside of the body, The experiments demonstrated that the DNA could be influenced by laser light and sound. Why do we love music? Why do people need music? And people do need music. From the beginnings of time, we have used music as a way to lift ourselves up. Now, part of what I was looking at as far as light is concerned is the fact that, the Bible says that the universe was built in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. But the fascinating thing is science and the Bible, science and the information that's being given, is that it also says in many reference points that in Psalms, in the New Testament, it actually denotes that ultimately we are part of everything the universe is. So how do we bring ourselves in balance? Because now they've discovered that the earth has a heartbeat, that the earth is actually a living being. But because we've been given an idea that we are living beings, we forget that everything else is. Absolutely everything else. I was taught by my guides that earth becomes plant. Plant becomes animal. Animal becomes human, and human becomes spirit. That every single thing is in evolution and evolution. Evolution is what your physical being does, and what the world, in the world that you live in right now, does. Evolution is what your soul does, and the growth of your soul. And the older I get and the more I learn is the fact that the only thing that prevents you from finding your frequency of balance, the frequency of balance, is how do you treat yourself? What do you say to yourself? What are the words come out of your mouth? I go spastic when I hear somebody say they just ate something that was to die for. Why would you want to die for that? It's to celebrate life. Florence Shen has a wonderful book, Game of Life. And part of that has to do with the fact that ultimately our words are our wand, we wave them over a situation. But we're working in a dense world, and part of that dense world, it's easier to fall into the negative trap. They get pulled into the solidness of dysfunction than to learn to talk to ourselves, our body. We love ourselves in the process. Because we all face challenges. Every single one of us face challenges. And this is also true. I work with angels, and they've taught me that when you leave this earth, they're not going to ask you who your mother was, who your father was, who your lover was, or who your children were. The very first question every one of you will be asked, did you love the skin you're in? Did you take good care of the godchild you are? And they told me that the problem with this world is we have gotten so caught up in the better than less than, that people who we see as powerful are actually people who are stealing your energy. They don't have their own. They need yours. I've worked with spirit that have got caught between worlds and didn't complete their passing. And most of them is because of the fact that they think they don't have permission to go, or they think they're going to some place called hell. If somebody told me and I thought that I was going to go to hell, would I want to go? And yet, the truth is that hell never appeared in the Bible until the King James Version. And it started because of the fact that, now my brain's going to go sideways on me, that Dante's Inferno. Because at the time, the priest of the day, the priests that existed at the time, always talked about the 7 levels of heaven. And there are 7 levels in the divine world. And believe it or not, the weight of your heart is what's going to determine which level you end up in. So that, for instance, if I have the ability to harm other people, to hurt people, I will end up in the first level. Because the denseness of my own thoughts will hold me there. We have a part of our principles that say the doorway to reformation is never closed. So the worst person that you can imagine will always have the right and the ability for redemption of their own soul. The trick here is that there are a lot of people that act like horses, you know what. The truth is, it only bothers you if you take it personal. When in fact they act that way because that's how they believe they are. That's how they think they are. And they're demonstrating to you exactly what they believe about themselves. Science is starting to bring spirituality and science together. And that's another part of this religion that makes it great, is the fact that ultimately there is a science, a natural law for everything. The fact that they told me I could take this down to a liquid and bring it back to a solid anytime I wanted, they said is like the law of flight. Somebody had to be curious enough to know how. Somebody had to have the desire to do it. And then they had to learn the natural laws that allow them to do it. And here today, we take it for granted. Where at one time, the idea that we could get in a plane and fly across the world, you would think you were insane. There are people that were put to death for saying that the earth rotated around the sun. And yet, we had to learn that as truth before we actually accepted it. You know, there's a thing going around the internet that I really love. And what it says is religion are the laws that they tell you you have to be. Spirituality is connecting directly to God yourself. Spirituality is knowing that every living cell in your body, if we were made in God's image, you have to think of what that means. Is the fact that we are Godhead of every single living cell in our body. And just like here on earth, people rebel and people do things that they shouldn't. And sometimes God has to step in and help us to get back on the road. But I don't believe that God sits here and does favors for one person and punishes somebody else. I've never believed that in my entire life. At 6 years old, I knew better. I find it interesting, at 6 years old, I was at a Southern Baptist revival. And I came into this world seeing everything vibrationally, not male, not female, but vibration. And I watched why he took his voice and he lowered it and raised it, and lowered it and raised it, lowered it, raised it. And after a while, he asked everybody to empty their pockets. I watched my father sign over his check, and I knew at 6 years old, that meant for 2 weeks we weren't going to eat. But the message I heard from this man is that if you're good, God benefits you, and if you're not, God punishes you. And I remember thinking after he got through and he walked out and got into a stretch limo that I wasn't going to eat for 2 weeks, and we didn't. And that ultimately that man had violated everybody in that room. At 6 years old, that's what my thoughts were. But I also believe that you could not get here one time and get it right. How is it fair that somebody has a Learjet and their biggest angst is their chef didn't show up? And you got other people living in tents having to walk 6 miles just to get water and pray they can find something along the way that their kids could eat. Everything is perspective. And the sad thing is that there are some people that choose lives, according to the angels I work with, where they feel like that they hadn't done what they wanted to do in their last life. So instead of changing, they put themselves in a subservient or a less than position, thinking that somehow that's going to make them better. My angels told me that they're really getting tired because people are going over so wounded that they have to spend all their time trying to heal them again, trying to make them understand that God didn't turn its back on us, but God gave us permission to learn about ourselves. You're sent to a school, and this is a very dense school. But if I go out and exercise, I don't expect that as soon as I pick up a dumbbell or try to lift something that my muscles are going to go along with that. My muscles are going to, no, please don't do that. But we know that if we keep doing it, it becomes easier and easier. So thinking about all of this, light, thinking about the idea that there's more to us than just our physicality. There's more that they're learning to understand about our cellular system and about the influence of light and sound on us. That letting us to learn and grow, letting us to learn and become. Because the biggest challenge I see personally is that when I talk to spirit, the very first thing somebody who just passed will tell me is they're so excited, they feel like they're connected to everybody and everybody's connected to them. Following that up, when we lose a loved one, they are the first ones to try to help us. But there is a natural law in every dimension, regardless of which dimension you're in. And try to remember it's only a frequency of energy. That ultimately, no one is allowed to interfere with your free will. I have dealt with some really dark souls sometimes. And what I find mostly is that they're in fear. And they're going to try to make you afraid because they want your energy. And that's the energy they take from you, your fears. But isn't that what's happening on this planet right now? That people are living in their fears. And they've lost faith that there is a higher order. I believe it was Shakespeare that said, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. So try to remember that power is not about being able to control somebody else's life. Power is not about being bigger and stronger than somebody else. Power is knowing your own heart and not letting somebody else disturb that. Not letting somebody else's attitude, presentation, expectation to control us. When I was growing up, my stepmother used to say to me all the time, when God made you, April, he didn't break the mold, he smashed it. I thought that was the greatest thing she could have said to me. Because in my mind, I'm hearing, you mean I'm that special? But the trick is, I love who I am. I try to be the best I can be. And I'm a human being in a human world, and sometimes that doesn't always work out so well. But it's not about what we did. Can we honor what we did? I had a student one time that used to come to class, and every week she'd expound upon how nasty her neighbor was and what they did. In great detail, she would tell us. And in great detail, would give her tools to work with it. And one day she came in and she proceeded very proudly to tell us all the nasty things she did to her neighbor. And I said to her, just stop for a minute. I want you to think about this. What you're telling me is your higher self went down to your lower self and you had a party. Honor that. Because if you don't, you get trapped in it. We get trapped in those things. Because if you were perfect, you wouldn't be here. But people walk around as though they're going to school, but they're supposed to know everything before they get there, and they're going to get punished if they don't. I know the greater universe knows that we're learning and growing. I know that the greater universe is trying to help us the best they can. And I know that it drives me crazy that they will give me a little piece of information when they know all of it, but they'll only give me this little piece because we have to figure it out. We have to learn what we like, what we don't like. Because when you do that, when you take personal responsibility for your happiness or unhappiness, when you get to the spirit world, you're going to be stronger because of it. You're going to know yourself better and your own thoughts and your own feelings about something, and not just it's the general consensus, so I'll go along. You know, I say this all the time. If God wanted you to be a lapdog, God could have created that. But God gave us free will and a place to practice it. And instead of practicing the God within ourselves, we practice better than less than. Am I good enough? Did I do enough? Did I hurt myself enough? Can I have it now? Do I deserve it? I don't believe in a God that plays those kind of games. But I do give that even the angels told me if somebody's lying in the gutter hurting themselves, they can't lift a finger until they're asked. They need your permission to say. And believe me, there are many times I say to my guides, listen, I might look like just a dumb earth being right now. But I'm not getting this one, so could you please show it to me another way? And they'll give it to me in a different perspective, in a different reality, in a different way for me to look at it. But how many things of that is true in your life now? That until you know what you don't know it. The universe is not judgmental towards us. We are judgmental towards ourselves. The things we heard said to ourselves, said to us as children. It's a scientific fact that up until between 6 and 8, you don't have moral reasoning. Without moral reasoning, you're just in survival mode. You're trying to figure out what is and what isn't, what's true and what's not true. And then we listen to things that are being said about ourselves. We listen to the words people use against us. And ultimately, the fact is, and I love this one when they say, well, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Well, I don't think so. But the point is, how do we become light? Not light, but light. Less dense, less heavy. Two things I believe. First, don't take what somebody else says personal because they're coming from where they're at. It's not you. They're handing you the truth that they know. And you have to ask yourself, does this suit my soul? I love that saying. Does this suit my soul? And it's up to you to decide. Does it or doesn't it? Anger, fear, resentment are soul killers. That's what puts denseness instead of light. People are just busy being who they are, not who you wish them to be, not what you'd like them to be. They are. And learning to love people past, especially as women, we look at something and we see what the best could be. And so we roll up our sleeves and we jump in and we try to help. But that's not how the divine universe works. You give us a piece to say, maybe you should look at this direction. You give us a piece and make us work for it. Self-love, self-worth, self-esteem. Nowhere does that say that somebody else can give that to you. It's called self-love, self-worth, self-esteem. That's your personal responsibility. That's where your happiness or unhappiness lies by natural law. You came into this world with something you intended to heal, whether it be for your family or for yourself. Nobody's expecting you to be Mother Teresa. But what you do from your heart matters. And believe me, they know. Everybody is born with an angel assigned and 2 guides. No secret. They know. They know your motivation. They know your ideas. They know your belief system. And they are ever ready standing there and say, tell me when you want help. Tell me. Because I can't roll up my sleeves and help until you ask. Your only responsibility, guys, is to be the best you know how to be at this moment in time. To know that you're growing and learning. But it gets back to the idea of light and darkness. You look around this room, and the truth is, if light and dark did not exist at the exact same time, this room wouldn't exist. Nothing would manifest into a form. Is balance. And learning that the act of manifestation has to do with using both energies, not one. Because you cannot be in balance unless you have both. We are born into a family. We're born into a name. We're born into a familiar. And when I really accepted that fact, I asked, what was I on at the time? Because that really must have been good stuff. How did you convince me to do this? Okay. So the journey that we're on here isn't about dark and light. It's about balance. It's about recognizing that everybody has an opinion, everybody needs one. But you don't have to adopt your neighbors. And owning your own is what's going to make you stronger when you get to the other side. As the God in me honors the grace of the God in you. Thank you.